Ladies and gentlemen, go back to your seats. Gently but surely, we're going to start. Don't need to be silent yet. People need to move to sit. Thank you, Hunter. Well, thank you everyone for being here with us today. Thank you particularly to our hosts, the Shanghai University of Engineering Sciences, Professor Low, but also the city of Suzhou. I am Carlos Álvarez Pereira, the Secretary General of the Club of Rome, and it's a real pleasure and an honor, an historical honor for us to be here. Let me make clear the point that this is an historical moment for the Club of Rome to come to China, to work with our dear partners in the organization of this conference, and at the same time, as some of you know, it is a comeback in a way, because our founder, Aurelio Peccei, Italian businessman and visionary, came here. I don't know if he came to Suzhou, but he came to China in 1935, 90 years ago. And definitely he was very much inspired by the Chinese history, tradition, culture. In a very different China, I think if he's, from wherever he's looking at us, now he's probably be smiling, happy about the evolution of, and impressed, of course, about the evolution of China, as we are all impressed. So, together with my colleague, we will be the masters of ceremony of the 3 days of conference. Let me introduce you to our colleague of the Club of Rome, Songqiao Yao. Very pleased to do this with you, Songqiao.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Hello, everyone, dear friends and esteemed guests and elders from near and far. My name is Song Qiao. This is my second year as a member of Club of Rome. I come from China and grew up in northern China. Suzhou is this place that's very, very close to my heart because it does hold 2,500 years of history, of poetry, of beauty, and of connection with nature. So I'm really happy and honored to be here with Carlos and also offering a little bit of space in between sessions to help us connect a bit more to the land and the culture here.
Thank you. You have the program of sessions. We designed this as a journey. I don't know if we will have climbed the 2 mountains by the end of the conference, but this is definitely a journey through different aspects of this trip to ecological civilization. And definitely for us, there is a big intention of mutual learning, mutual understanding. And we have to start that part. We, people who come, not only members of the Club of Rome, we have also invited other experts from 15 different countries or so. For us, it's crucial, to start by learning from China, understanding better China. And this is the purpose of the first session that we will have now. And we have the privilege to count with the presence of an esteemed personality from China, Professor Zhang Weiwei, who will give us a keynote with his perspectives on China and where China is going. And then we will have also a panel moderated by our colleague Chandra Nair. So Professor Zhang, please, your floor is yours. A big applause for him.
Thank you, Carlos. 谢谢娄校长。我参加了这么多的这个各种各样的论坛会议，这个开幕式好像是最有活力的之一。I said I participate in many forums and conferences, and that kind of opening we had just now definitely is one of the most dynamic ones, starting with ideas. And my institute, China Institute, is known to producing ideas. And so, as agreed, I will give this lecture in English, and then we're going to have a conversation and dialogue. Well, I look at the very program of this conference. The title for my speech is slightly different between Chinese and English. The Chinese one is a path forward from a Chinese perspective, how to realize ecological civilization. The English one is simpler, a path forward from a Chinese perspective. So there's subtlety. And what I want to do is try to strike something in the middle, slightly narrower than the English version and broader than the Chinese version. So I changed the title a bit into a path forward from a Chinese perspective towards a new civilization. In other words, I love this idea. Professor Luo also mentioned at the beginning, holistic approach. And this is something Chinese and Chinese philosophy really emphasizes. In other words, it's a new civilization in terms of economic, political, social, ecological, even military and geopolitical dimension. If we look at this from a holistic perspective, we may gain more insights. Today, even the most critical, those who are most critical of China, cannot deny China's extraordinary rise. And China has become, in fact, the world's largest economy by purchasing power parity 1 decade ago, since 2014. And now China has the world's largest middle class and the world's largest industrial and manufacturing power. And China lifted over 800 million people out of abject poverty. And China is also in the fourth frontier of the new technological revolution. Even in per capita terms, if you look at the daily consumption of protein and vegetables and fruits, China also now leads the United States. So this is an extraordinary achievement that even for Chinese, unimaginable, say, 3 decades, 4 decades ago. It's indeed a miracle. And China has also become a science and technology superpower. According to a recent report from the ASPI, Australian Strategic Policy Institute, China leads the United States in 57 out of 64 critical technologies. So this is indeed impressive. Of course, as far as this conference is concerned, China has become the indisputable global leader in renewable energies and in green transition, accounting for more than 70% of renewable energy products, from solar panels to EVs and to lithium batteries and more. Of course, our Professor Ren may have slightly dispute over that, as he has a different way of looking at every issue. But I think this is the right path. We could have discussions. Now, the secret of success, how to explain China's success. I have spent a lot of years working on what I call the Chinese model of development. And I think I will share two findings from my research. One is the nature of the Chinese state, which is very unique. It's not a typical nation state. It is actually a civilizational state. I'll come to that. And I will discuss briefly the Chinese model of development. And then I'll try to explain what I see as a new type of civilization. Now, when I say China's civilizational state, which means it's an amalgam of the world's longest continuous civilization and a super large modern state. As we are constrained by time, I will quickly summarize what I call the four supers: super large population, super vast territory, super long traditions, and super rich cultures. Each and every of these super is a blend of modern and the new. And this is something critical about China's success. Let me explain one by one. Yes, China's super vast population is something we inherited from our ancestors. Yet, this population is well educated. Today, China produces more engineers, more scientists than the Western countries combined every year. At any particular moment in China today, roughly 725 million scientists, engineers working on R&D any given day, 5 times more than the United States. So this kind of huge number and quality explains a lot why China can catch up with the United States and then surpass the United States in one way and in many other ways. Yes, super vast territory. It's a continent. This is also inherited from China's own history. You can fly for 5 hours, you're still within China. Yet, this vast territory is also connected with first-rate modern highways, high-speed trains, bullet trains, and today, 4G and 5G stations, digital infrastructure, first-rate. Yeah. And I can see with certainty, if you go to Tibet or Xinjiang, which are considered relatively backward, you go to villages, you look at their 4G and 5G Wi-Fi's, it's better than many European capitals. So this is already totally different. And then, of course, super long traditions. As a political scientist, I try to focus on to what extent Chinese political tradition has shaped China's today's success. For instance, in the West, so-called democracy is largely equivalent to election. But Chinese one is different. It's called selection plus election. Selection is by far more important than election. And if you look at the criteria for the top leadership in China, say members of political bureau or standing committee, the top 7 are standing committee members, minimum required for most of them was 2 terms, if not 3 terms, as party secretary or number 1 of Chinese province, 2 terms, which means literally they've governed over 100 million people before they come to current positions. So by far, the Chinese leadership today is one of the most competent in the world. If you look at every month they have a collective study session. You just check the titles of their topics. You'll be so impressed, blockchain technology, AI technology, etc. Every month there is a new subject. Yeah. And this selection comes from China's own tradition. China is the country that created a civil servant examination system called Ke about 1,500 years ago. And this has become now what of selection. Your experience, your competence, your qualifications, then plus election. And same with super rich cultures. In terms of political culture, you may notice, China is the country strongly influenced by Confucianism. And Confucianism, its political culture, emphasizes people's livelihood first. Whatever you do, political, economic, social, other policies, you must all boil down to delivering something tangible for people's livelihood. It could be material, it could be ecological, it could be spiritual, but it must be something tangible. So what China hates most is empty talk. So this is something we said misleading the country. And somehow, this is happening in the Western political model. People talk, 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 but no action. Yeah. I just came back from South Africa. They had a saying called the NATO, describing European projects called the no action, talk only. What can we do? And then if we have this larger picture of civilizational state, you can understand better the Chinese model of development and modernization. I try to cut a long story short. Politically, China is governed by what I call a holistic interest party. The Western model is known for partisan interest, partial interest political parties. Yeah, this is totally different. And this holistic interest party comes from China's own tradition, where China was unified in 221 BC, so over 2,000 and many years ago. Since then on, China has been governed, in most cases, by what I call unified ruling entity. Otherwise, the country disintegrated. And the civilizational state is an amalgamation of hundreds of states into one over its long history. For instance, Jiangsu province, where we are now, used to be called the Wu, state of Wu. And you are going to Zhejiang, it will be state of Yue. They were different states, but they amalgamated, over its long history into one nation called the Chinese state. So this is very different, and China has bitter experience of disintegration after adopting something similar to Western model, like following the 1911 Republican Revolution. We adopted more or less American model. Then the country degenerated into civil wars. Warlords fighting each other. Each warlord was supported by one or another European power. It's a miserable history China had. And then behind this unified ruling entity, Chinese Communist Party is buttressed by this system of meritocracy. Very strict. You have to be performing better and well in order to get a promotion and get to certain positions. This model is not perfect, but it's, to be honest, very competitive, especially with the American model. It's by far superior to the American model. You have the Donald Trump, this kind of model. I'm not saying this now. I said this 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I debated with Professor Fukuyama in the 2011. He said, Chinese political reform. I said, yes, but you need more political reform because your system was a product of pre-industrial era, agricultural society. You have to reform. Otherwise, I predicted in 2011, you're going to elect a leader worse off than George W. Bush. At that time, he was the poorest rating president. So history turned out to be right for my prediction. Now, economically, it is a mixed economy, what we call the socialist market economy. In the ideal sense, the state sector, private sector, they complement each other. A good example is China's internet industry. And when I say China has this first-rate digital infrastructure, that's the responsibility of the state sector. Each and every village, wherever you are in Tibet, in high mountains, in Xinjiang, you must have 4G and 5Gs. That's taken by the state-owned enterprises. Then the private enterprises had made best use of this availability of first-rate infrastructure and make sure that first-rate e-commerce is provided. So China is arguably the only country that achieved what we call, with one smartphone, you can do everything. For a decade, if not longer, we don't have any use of cash. Yeah, so it's already a different type of economy. And socially, it is positive interactions between the state and society, rather than pitting state versus against state, society, or pitting society against state. It's a positive interaction. Now, what's the new civilization? Let me tell you briefly, say 3 or 4 stories before I come to my conclusion. The first story is in China's Xinjiang, there is a huge desert called the Taklamakan Desert. It's the size of Germany, one of the largest deserts in the world. Yet, China has made a consistent effort for 46 years, over 4 decades. Now, the desert has been encircled with a green belt. So sand has been stabilized, and in which we have a huge, you may call, green power generation base. Millions and millions of solar panels generating green energies. And some people do not know, Xinjiang has become now one of China's largest green food producing regions, rice, corn, and more. I was in Germany, in Berlin, 3 months ago. The German media, like the American media and Western media, is very hostile to China, especially on issue of Xinjiang. They spread so many lies, for ordinary Chinese, laughable to the extreme, Every year, over 200 million visitors go to Xinjiang. If your lies were tenable, anyone with certain education can realize something goes wrong. Obviously, it's ridiculous to such a degree, People laugh to their teeth off, So this is unbelievable. But they do report this kind of progress made in Xinjiang. I said within 10 or more years, Xinjiang may become the most developed economy in the region of, say, with a lot of Islamic influence. So this will be a miracle. You can compare, Xinjiang's economic development, scientific, technological development with other Islamic regions or countries. That would be fascinating. The second case is the Green Deal. I know we have a lot of European scholars and experts here, but somehow it's really, how should I say it? Europeans are known to talk a lot about the green transition. Green Deal, we remember all this, come from Europe. You are the leader, in advocating green transition. Yet in China, it's done. That's the key difference, done. So the renewable energies today in China are cheaper than traditional energies. So this is really a tremendous success for all those who support fighting climate change, for green transition, for renewable energies. It's revolutionary. It brings so much hope for mankind, for developing countries, for global south. If you go to Africa, they use Chinese solar technology, so cheap, so affordable, and so many choices, so many varieties. So this, again, is revolutionary. So much of candle spirit. It's not just talk, it's a 5-year plan. And within every year, we have the People's Congress, it's called democracy, real democracy. People will ask Chinese Prime Minister, to what extent you fulfill your promises? And he will report back. You just compare every February or January, February, the report of Chinese Premier and the State of Union speech by US President. You will see the qualitative difference between the democracy when the Chinese one. It's such a quality of decision making. Every line of the report means a lot for the everyday life of Chinese people. And the other is just rhetoric, and people forget overnight. Yet, it's an American model and Chinese model. And the third one is, of course, this ecological civilization. And China is arguably the only country that raised the whole issue of green transition at the level of, to the level of national strategy entitled ecological civilization. Of course, behind this, Xi Jinping talked a lot about this. Clear waters and lush mountains are invaluable assets. So only 10, 12 years ago, a lot of problem with Chinese climate. Now you see blue sky, clear water everywhere. Yeah, within 1 decade, it's done. Yeah, it's remarkable. Even for Chinese, most did not expect this kind of achievement in ecological civilizations. And now China produces roughly 2/3 of the solar panels, EV vehicles, renewable energies. And it's not only for China, but for the world as a whole. And then another example, a case, is BRI initiative, Belt and Road Initiative, which many of you know. I don't want to elaborate too much. Basis initiated 12 or 13 years ago by Chinese leader Xi Jinping. And now it's the world's largest platform for common good, for exchanges, for economic development. And China invested over $1 trillion and roughly 5,000 projects going on, 1/3 in Africa. And most of them successful because now it's mainly driven by private companies, which means it's viable already. So this is very important, and it's larger common good and platform for international cooperation. And now increasingly, we have seen this BRI, it's called the digital BRI, it's called the green BRI or Green Silk Road. We're doing this with ASEAN and with other countries. So this is a remarkable achievement. And the final story is, as a student of international relations and political science, I read this report by Munich Security Council 2 years back. It's called lose-lose. Actually, it's lose-lose for Europe. Due to the Ukrainian crisis and the war, Europe has lost peace, development, and prosperity. But in case of Asia, if you look at China, ASEAN, together, 3 times more population than Europe. Yet this space, China, ASEAN, has achieved win-win over the past 5 decades. So a lot of interesting lessons, of course, based on the win-win cooperation, I call 3 pillars: comprehensive, sustainable development, comprehensive security, and civilizational dialogues. Totally different from EU's relations with the United States. That's something like, keep Russia out, keep America in, keep Germany down. The Chinese-ASEAN approach is very inclusive, focusing on development, focusing on comprehensive security, focusing on civilizational dialogues. As a result, what you see is not only for Southeast Asia, but even for Central Asia, we also have Shanghai Cooperation Organization. What happened is, in the past, these 2 regions, Southeast Asia and Central Asia, are called the geographical curse. For all kinds of reasons, landlocked countries, island nations, poor and problematic, full of geopolitical risks. Yet now, this geographical curse is becoming geographical blessing. All these nations, in many ways led by China, focusing on sustainable development, focusing on win-win cooperation, rather than geopolitical considerations. It's a new type of what I call geopolitical civilization, rather than geopolitical rivalry. And in this regard, we can understand better Chinese leader Xi Jinping's 4 global initiatives for development, for security, for civilizational dialogue, for global governance. All these are buttressed by China's own experience at home and international experience, such as with ASEAN and with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So it's very solid and very reliable with both ideas and good practice. For BRI, the idea is discussing together, building together, benefiting together. Yeah, it's a win-win. Yeah, you out of your own interest join this project BRI. If you are not interested, you don't need to join. Yeah, so it's very, very clear cut. Now, what will be a new civilization? And so let me try to distill this whole my talk into these several categories. So politically, a holistic institution capable of planning and execution. This is very important. If it's not a holistic institution or party, you only have party and interest party, you cannot produce plans. Every 4 years, 5 years, you have to change the plan, and it cannot be realized. But even for this EV, China leads the world in EV production. It's a result of 4 5-year plans, 20 years. Yeah. They have been executed as well. So the Chinese model represents something entirely new for the whole world. Economically, indeed, we do think mixed economy is important. State and private sector should both play their roles, ideally complementary. Otherwise, it will be difficult. Socially, as I said, a positive interaction between society and state. Militarily, I'll discuss a bit militarily. In terms of philosophy, the key difference between Chinese and American philosophy in terms of military mind is for the Americans, it's friend or foe, ally or enemy. For China, no, as a civilizational state, we have much longer vision. We think it's friend or potential friend. Very important, yeah, key difference. And then Chinese defense capability now is very powerful. And some of you like it or not, but it's a fact, because China learned a bitter lesson from its own dealings with Western powers in its long history. When you're so weak, you were bullied miserably. Yeah. So what we did was build powerful defense capability. And in the words of US Defense Secretary Hegseth, he said last November and this April, he said, from my knowledge, Chinese hypersonic missiles is capable of destroying all American submarines, all American aircraft carriers within 20 minutes. Yeah. He said openly, so must be cautious with China. But on the other hand, the Chinese military philosophy is very prudent, very sophisticated. If you read the first chapter, first line of the Arts of War by Sun Tzu, not the art of deal. It's precaution on the method of war. It's about survival of a nation. Be very cautious. So the Chinese philosophy for military, starting from Sun Tzu, is always maximum power to subdue your enemy without actually fighting the war. So now today, it's amazing, Dutch philosopher Spinoza said in 18th century, he said, peace is not just absence of war. Peace is a virtue in the heart of the people. This is Chinese culture. Chinese adores peace. But for one reason or another, China was bullied again for 1 century by foreign powers. So I remember Bertrand Russell, a British philosopher, came to China in 1911 after the First World War. And the Chinese intellectual elite were disillusioned with the Chinese civilization because it's lost war again to the European powers. But Bertrand Russell soundly advised his Chinese counterpart. He said, Europeans were already mad with these wars and wars and wars. But you have a wonderful, superb culture respecting peace. But he said, with vision, He said, I'm pretty sure, one day China will be capable of self-defense. And then your culture for peace will be a tremendous asset for mankind. This is China today. We keep this power, but we do not use the nuclear. China said since 1964, when China tested first nuclear device, not to use the nuclear weapons against non-nuclear weapon states, not to be the first to use nuclear weapons. Yeah, so this is the whole philosophy, which will bring about, hopefully, prevent the Third World War. In fact, a country like China, 1.4 billion people, has risen to such a degree peacefully. It's already a miracle in human history. Any previous European powers came to a certain stage of modernization, already they've gone through many wars. Ecologically, of course, China takes the lead in ensuring green transition. And finally, ideologically, a civilizational state with deep-rooted belief in one humanity. As Xi Jinping proposes this idea of building a community of shared future for mankind. In other words, it's about peaceful coexistence, about win-win for all, not might is right or zero-sum game. And we reject categorically this American formula, either on the table or in the menu. We don't buy this, And this is a world of wolf, not the really real world for human beings. And also, the Western, especially Anglo-Saxon idea of divide and rule, will cause so many problems in the world today, and in the past as well. But Chinese strongly believe we should embrace the world, what we call unite and prosper. China does that at home, and China now promotes this abroad, internationally. So all this point to some kind of new type of civilization in the making, and it indeed offers hope for mankind. Not because I'm Chinese, I have some bias for Chinese culture or whatever, but indeed, sometimes I think, fortunately, we have China today. Otherwise, there'll be not much progress in fighting extreme poverty, not much progress in fighting climate change, not much progress in preventing wars, etc. So with this slightly optimistic note, I thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zhang. So my name is Chandran. Can you all hear me? Yep. I work for the Club of, I don't work, I kind of work. I serve for the Club of Rome. We did a disservice by not introducing you. So let me just introduce Professor Zhang. So when Carlos approached me about, I think, a month ago to say, hey, is there someone Chinese who has both an international appreciation of the world we live in and all the issues of development, etc., who could come and address this audience? I immediately thought of Professor Zhang Weiwei, mainly because most Chinese will know he is, his TV shows, I think, attract 50 million people. Only in China you can attract 50. It's not soap opera. They're talking serious stuff. He's extremely well known. Professor Zhang is a professor of international relations at Fudan University. He's the director of the International Institute at Fudan, and also runs something called the China Academy. And he's got a weekly show that airs on Shanghai TV, I believe, that is viewed by tens of millions of people every week. His views are appreciated by a large audience. He's on the internet, YouTube, Bilibili, and all of those Chinese networks that you can imagine in China, and has been considered, some may consider him pro-China, but he said he's not necessarily just pro-China, but he's Chinese. And he has a view about international relationships. And he's also made lots of predictions that have been kind of interesting. One prediction he made that he reminded me of today was, I think it was in 2022, was it? 21, that he said that the current president of the United States, I never mention his by name, by the way, just to say, would return. And I think he's one of the few people who predicted that he would actually return. Professor Zhang is widely known as a public intellectual, even in Asia, in some parts of Africa, etc. And he's an academic and a writer. So just to give the context of Professor Zhang's background and his willingness to come and speak to us. Thank you so much. Thank you. So I think, Philippa, someone's got to bring some chairs over. Where's the crew? Do you want me to bring the chairs? Sorry?
Now we will have the video.
Okay, so the way we're going to do this, we're going to have a video of a presentation.
Distinguished colleagues.
Yeah, from David.
It is my honor to join you today in this exploration of the human pathway to an ecological civilization. I come with deep respect for China's extraordinary accomplishments toward this goal. Over the past 40 years, China has lifted hundreds of millions from poverty, expanded access to education and healthcare, reversed rapid population growth, built vast networks of clean transportation, and become a world leader in renewable energy, electric mobility, reforestation, and ecological restoration. These achievements are transforming both China and the world. Yet, as President Xi's two-mountain theory reminds us, humanity now stands at a defining crossroads. One mountain, the mountain of clean waters, fresh air, and lush forests, represents the living earth, the foundation of life's well-being. The other, the mountain of gold and silver, represents material wealth gained through growth in the use of fossil fuels that depends on exploiting the lush green mountain. Climbing both mountains appears desirable, but as I wrote recently for the Club of Rome, no climber can scale two mountains at once. We must choose. This is not China's dilemma alone. It is the choice facing all nations. If any major power pursues endless consumption growth, it will undermine the ecological foundations of human survival. Earth's atmosphere and oceans do not recognize human borders. The Earth Charter is humanity's most inclusive consensus statement. It describes the future most of Earth's people want. And it reminds us, I quote, "The choice is ours. Form a global partnership to care for Earth and one another, or risk the destruction of ourselves and the diversity of life." Unquote. The Earth Charter calls us all to respect Earth as a living community, to care for one another with compassion, and to build just, sustainable, and peaceful societies. These principles align deeply with China's own commitment to harmony between people and nature. China has already made substantial progress up the Green Mountain. Its world-changing contributions deserve recognition and celebration by us all. But the challenge remains. China's continued growth and dependence on fossil fuels, expanding highways, personal automobiles, and coal-fired power plants continues to pull China and the rest of us toward the devastation of the mountain of gold and silver. The world's poor majority, farmers, fishers, and all others providing essential physical labor, continue to bear the price of the floods, the droughts, and the heat waves that threaten their livelihoods. My country, the United States of America, has recently abandoned all pretense of providing global leadership toward the Green Mountain of ecological civilization. but I assure you that a great many of us are working tirelessly to elect new leaders for the United States. Leaders committed to environmental care, meeting the basic needs of all of Earth's people, and putting the end to war and other forms of violence. Meanwhile, China has demonstrated a capacity for purposeful transformation unmatched in human history. If China now commits fully to the Green Mountain, it can establish itself as the global leader in achieving an ecological civilization grounded in the principles of the Earth Charter. It can lead the world into a new era of shared prosperity for all within the limits of a living Earth. Let us strive to climb the Green Mountain, the mountain of life, together, and to build a global civilization of peace, equality, and Earth care that works for the living Earth and all its people. I thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So we're going to have a panel discussion now, and as the chairs are being set, I'll just describe how I hope we can have a useful panel discussion. What I'll do is, of course, first invite the two panelists. Mampela, please. Those of you who don't know Mampela by reputation, I don't know where you've been, but Mampela is a former co-president of the Club of Rome, a distinguished human rights advocate, and very much involved in the liberation of South Africa. And then Peter. Peter, again, a banker, member of the, former banker, member of the Club of Rome Exco, and I think the founding member of the Global Alliance for Banking for Good, Gavi, as well, and Professor Zhang. So the way I like to do this is to, it's okay, it's all right. That's all right. Okay. So the way I like to do this is engage with the panel for about 20 minutes or so, and 30 minutes, and then open the floor. And the first thing I'd like to do is ask the two distinguished panel members to take 3 or 4 minutes to respond to what you've heard, and from both your global view as well as the regions you come from, to then ask questions to Professor Zhang. So Mampela, I know you'll represent the world in both Africa. Peter, hopefully you'll represent Europe, and leaving out the United States, maybe. I don't know, but you could take on the whole Western world. And then I'll try and represent a very important part of what Professor Zhang mentioned, also the ASEAN region, which has 1 billion people, 700 million people, reaching 1 billion, and where I'm from, and where we had a very interesting meeting. So Mampela, the floor is yours, and a remark, and then a question. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much to our Chinese hosts. Thank you, Professor, for a very inspiring encounter of people who are members of one single human family. It's been fascinating coming back to China, which the first time I visited here was early 2000. And each time I come, I'm just amazed at how much more has been done in a way that demonstrates the power of a leadership that is not only competent, but is driven by values that we heard, leveraging Chinese ancient culture and its values. And though that culture, I would say, it reflects the living systems, values, framework that our common ancestors from the African continent, because all of you, Professor, are Africans. And so I'm here speaking on behalf of all of us. But what is beautiful is that when people left the continent, wherever there are indigenous people, they who hold on to their values, you will see this commonality of values that support and celebrate life. And so my comments from this absolutely amazing presentation we've just heard is simply to say, this is the kind of approach to civilizations and to development that I would like to see permeating the academy. One of the problems that we have in the rest of the world is that our education system is a pre-industrial revolution education system worsened by the materialism, the individualism, and the winner takes all and more is better. And so I think one of the strengths of China is its focus on its ancient value system. And I'm not saying they are perfect in doing so, but they are the best in doing so. And I think what you explained to us about the difference between selection and election, I would say the African continent will never be able to realize its full potential until it returns to this idea of competence in leadership as being much more important than how popular you are. My question to you is, what advice would you have for young Africans? Because people my age who are Africans are done. They are the problem. How would you advise also the Chinese government in its Belt and Road strategy to focus much more on helping the potential new generation of African leaders to understand not just the glitz of the success of the Chinese development model, but to understand this cultural rootedness? Thank you.
Great question, Mandela. Over to you, Professor Zhang. 3-4 minutes. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Actually, I was in South Africa 2 months ago. Had good conversations with, I think, your former colleagues, the government, President Mothlandi, and others. And I tried to discuss with them how the Chinese success may be of some relevance for African countries. And I'm glad that I went to your Ministry for Higher Education. The minister told me that they are going to train 30,000 AI engineers. As he invited Huawei, which has the largest center abroad in South Africa. It will be deeply involved in helping South African training scientists, engineers, AI sector. 30,000, big number. So this is the one way China can make a modest contribution one way or another as part of global South-Southern cooperation. And one question I discussed with my South African counterparts is how to what I call break the cycle of election and populism. Yeah, every 4 or 5 years, there is this kind of cycle. And I said, from Chinese experience, unless one considers political system has nothing to do with development. Most global South countries don't agree. They think system must work for the development. If that's the case, then how to break this cycle? So I put forward an idea in my interview with Sunday Times editor-in-chief. I said, since Africa already has African Union's vision for 2063 something, and why can't, ANC or the South African government try to produce a long-term plan after consulting all the political parties, and then you reach consensus, whichever party come into power, this plan will be pursued. It will become part of the, not the constitution, part of the institutional framework, STEM framework, in the schools' textbooks, etc. Whatever government will commit to. Because obviously, when I was working in Beijing as Deng Xiaoping's interpreter, in 1980, he said, a country as large as China, we need at least 100 years of stability to transform itself into a modern, developed economy. So there are some of my humble advice to my South African counterparts 2 months ago. Thank you.
Peter, from your point of view, what did you take away? And one question for Professor Zhang, please.
First of all, I can only congratulate China with what they have achieved. I'm for the first time in China, and the past 3 days already I learned a lot, so congratulations. Now it's always difficult to comment on a success story. I think if I look at Europe and I feel European, what is something different than being a Western? Some people feel it's the same being in Europe or the US. That's not a real difference. I think it's always good to go back and see what does it mean, for example, for Europe, for the Netherlands. You are 100 times bigger than the Netherlands. So that also creates a different context. And I think your history is different. I'm not so sure the values. Human values are quite common in the world, but there are some differences. And the way you took those aspects, that context, into a successful plan is amazing. And I think for Europeans, there is a new moment to find out what is our destiny in that. I think one of the things we learned when I was young, the American way of life, that was the sort of ideal we had. And there were quite a few things who were quite likable. The movies, the way, the products they brought to Europe, we loved it. But that has changed. And that has changed particularly the last 3, 4, 5 years. And it takes some time for a continent, for countries to realize that things have changed. Why I'm saying that? I feel that just copy the Chinese way of life is probably not a solution. We can learn from your success, but what it does bring to Europe is find your own roots, look at your own context, see what works in Europe, what is different from what works in China, and be more independent from other people's way of life. And I think that is a strong base for cooperation worldwide, because I don't believe we will manage to have all the same way of working. We are too different in cultures, we are too different in histories. But if we show a little bit more respect for that everybody has his own development and find out how we work in that diversity together, I think we can solve climate issues. And my question for you, how do you see accepting maybe the diversity in the world of different models? How can they still be a good base for cooperation? What is the way of cooperating in a diverse world? Because working together in a world where we all do the same sounds easy, but will be a theoretical concept. But how do we work with that diversity? That would be particularly the role China has in the world now. So I hope you give me an answer.
Thank you. It's an easy question, in a way. Because Chinese philosophy is somehow, extremely strong in what French language calls mélange, mix everything together or integrate everything, as seen in Chinese food or Chinese cuisine with European cuisine. For European cuisine, it's very clear, vegetable, meat, sauce, da. For Chinese, all mixed, and mixed with flavor. If you're not mixed, it's not good. So Chinese is very strong in sorting out differences, and then what Confucius would say, diversity in harmony. That's the key feature of Chinese culture. So Chinese, if you look at it as a student of international relations, political science, in China's ancient times, there's no such distinction. We have a famous journal called Wen Shizhe, literature, history, and philosophy. It's always together. But when we go to Europe, we go to the United States, it's all separate. All kinds of disciplines, compartmentalized. But in Chinese culture, it's always interdisciplinary. It's always across civilization. As a result, I call China a civilization state. And if you look at, if you are for 3 days in this region, Shanghai, Jiangsu province, Zhejiang province, if you look carefully, their culture have a lot of similarities, but also differences. In terms of economic development, the role of the state, the role of the private companies, the role of state enterprise, foreign companies, all these are slightly different. A lot of nuances, yet they live together happily, and it's what we call the Yangtze River Delta. By the way, this Yangtze River Delta, 4 provinces together, is already a larger economy than Germany and then Japan. By nominal terms, if by purchasing power parity, it's even much larger. By nominal terms, it's larger than Germany and then Japan since 2 years ago. In other words, just some advice, humble advice from China, from Chinese, who have spent 20 years in Europe. And I think most important thing for our European friends is to fix its American problem. Keep European independence and identity. We're different. We can say no to United States, to Washington. That's important, as we say all the time.
No, I understand fully what, and maybe the name we will not mention in America helps in an interesting way. And may I give one comment on the political situation? It's a dangerous area, but I think we should not underestimate the strengths of the local and provincial politics in Europe. I'm, for example, in the Netherlands, very proud on mayors we have in the big cities and what they have achieved in the last 20 years. The problem is more on the national political sphere, and they make this short-termism too strong. But if you go a little bit under the surface and look at local and provincial, it sounds almost Chinese, if I may say so. They have these long-term relations, they know they have to build things. They try to protect themselves a little bit from the national politicians. And you seem to have solved that. So I'm very jealous about that. But under this surface, there's a lot of good things happening.
So can I just pick up on those questions, those points, both for Mampela and for Peter? Then I'll come to you with a question, Professor. Mampela and Peter, in Europe, and this is also for the Chinese audience here, so I think they would be interested. Why is there, what's your explanation, given that you say that at the local level there's different things happening, but why is there such an anti-China sentiment in Europe? It's a very broad question, but it's felt very strongly in China. Why do they not like us? This was not like this a few years ago. So why is that? And Mampela, in Africa, what is the sentiment about China? Because I'm going to go to Professor Zhang and say, it's not all a bed of roses, we all know. There are places, and I'll talk about Southeast Asia, where there are Chinese excesses by private entities. And I have advised the Chinese government when I can to get hard on those guys, because every time a Chinese company does something bad in Indonesia, they say, oh, it must be President Xi and those communists who did this, rather than it's a company. So what's your view on, where China, what's the sentiment? Where Chinese private enterprise, One Belt, One Road, probably going wrong, or in a way besmirching the collaborative effort? And why is it in Europe? Why is the sentiment so negative? Is it just a media creation? Is it a political elite creation? Is it a fear? What is it? So, but I'll start with you and then over to Peter.
Well, the general sentiment on my continent is a positive one towards China. A lot of people who didn't know much about China enjoy knowing more. And as you could see, and if you look at the statistics, there are more and more young people wanting to come and study here, etc. There is a big problem. And that big problem, I think, is more than just the private sector not being accountable to operate within the values that you have expressed, Professor. But it is also, from where we sit, we don't see a vigorous response by the national government when people in the name of China go to the Congo and have child labor and have practices that are clearly inhuman. And of course, in my own country, we have a serious water scarcity problem. But one of your companies is building a steel company on the banks of a river that is literally struggling to flow. And it's not that we didn't raise the matter through the normal channels, but it doesn't seem to be taken seriously. And I think that's it's an unfortunate situation, because it then gives us the impression that ecological civilization works and is revered in China, but China doesn't really bother about other ecological civilization for the rest of us.
So I think Professor Mapela is asking you to fix that problem. Talk to the top tomorrow and stop the project. But before you answer, Peter, over to you.
Yeah, I cannot say there is a slight negative sentiment, but you have now a big competitor on the other side of the ocean, so it's not so much anymore. I think where it comes from is fear, and it's the combination of economic power of China that is frightening people. A lot of products are not made anymore in the Netherlands, but made in China. They are cheaper. So that is a very fundamental fear, and there is a logic behind it, but still, in combination with not always clear how the relation in China is between state and private sector. The impression is that it's all controlled by the state, and this concept, what I learned here, is much more subtle. But that combination, economic power and unclarity around the relation state and private sector, creates fear. And for a part, is it also the effect of the efficiency comes from China, and products are better. Chinese electric cars are really valued. They're better than the European cars. So people see also that there is value in it, but that doesn't take away that fear of, am I losing my job? Is all the products, are they Chinese in the future? That is the sentiment behind it.
Okay, thank you for Manfela's question. It's indeed, a process of learning for Chinese companies. I've been to South Africa almost once a year over the past 3 years. And we also did field study on various projects. So what's good is we look at Africa as a whole, including South Africa. If you look at the opinion surveys by credible institutions, people's impression, as you mentioned, of Chinese presence, Chinese investment, is on the whole positive, or even very positive. So this is good. My own sense is there are two group of people who are not somehow happy with the Chinese investment. One is those small and medium-sized companies which suffer from Chinese competition. Yeah. And the other is NGOs, usually forced by the Western EU, or I don't know, USA. And they are in a way dynamic. And Chinese are not that strong yet in terms of lecturing back. And, but the specific mistakes made by Chinese companies are there for sure. But what's good is Chinese listen to criticisms. If really it's right criticism, Chinese make corrections, and very fast. Same within China. It's not that Chinese companies, Chinese government do not make mistakes. It's that the way they correct mistakes. It's much faster than Western model. It's, in other words, as I said, positive interaction between society and the state. That's something very true in China. Even in Suzhou or in Shanghai, if you look at the government response to criticisms, it's much more faster, efficient than usually the Western so-called democracies. And concerning Peter's questions, I would blame, the European media. It has a long tradition of smearing, everything. So what I say is, I had a lot of contact with European media, and I said you should have the courage to tell at least how most Chinese think of their own country, rather than from your subjective mind. Your system, it's not one party, it's not a multi-party system, it's not one person, one vote, so it must be evil system. That's logic. So I try to explain the Chinese system, how it has worked. It's even better than the European system in one way or another, but they don't listen. Then sometimes said, so I leave you in darkness. We don't care. You will regret. It's true. For so many years, if you go back to European academic journals or business reviews, this time last year, still known to be articles with the title, "Why China Cannot Innovate." It's always this kind of stuff for so many decades. I just feel, you have to really look at China as it is. And then if you look at even, because I was in Germany, you look at how German interest in Chinese affairs, so little, so few, as if China not that important. It's not a way to deal with the superpower, really, and the first-rate economy, even. So I think it's the media is to blame a lot for this kind of inertia to. I said it's a group of lazy bones. Don't work hard to understand something you do not know, you are not familiar with, unlike we do. We go to field study, we go to African country, go to European country. The Chinese philosophy seeks truth from facts, as accurate as possible. That's the philosophy of Chairman Mao and Deng Xiaoping. And if we make mistakes, correct it. And so I said, how can we do? We live in darkness, and we don't care. China moves ahead. I said to EU leaders, I said, we don't wait for it. We're like a bullet train. We move ahead. You will regret. That's a problem, really. So the Western media, European media in particular, German, French media, Libération, it's just, how to describe it, it's just awful media.
I'm going to kind of open up the floor, but I've got one point just to make in terms of the Chinese response, Mapella, so please lobby him to do something about this. But just today, because I'm from Southeast Asia, there have been lots of, like in all countries, but so-called criminal gangs from China operating in the border countries, Myanmar, Cambodia, etc. And there was a very large scam in Myanmar, which resulted in a lot of money being lost, etc. And the Chinese government, because it became so well known, decided to act together with the Myanmar government. They rounded up everybody. And today in the BBC, they announced that it's not, the preferred course of action, but I think the gang leaders, whom they call the mafia, are going to be executed, which seems extreme in my worldview, but that's the action that's being taken. And I think it's something that I agree with you, and I come from Southeast Asia where there are lots of complaints about things, but the shift has been one of cooperation and trying to get these things attended to by not blaming just the Chinese government, but understanding they are private actors. So my last question to you, then we'll open up the floor. In Southeast Asia, Professor, just as again for the benefit of everyone here, there's been a lot of dispute, but these things have reduced now, especially in my country, and there was the ASEAN meeting last week, which was a very big thing for all of us. But there continues to be the South China Sea issue, which again, for everyone's information, has never escalated into a big war. And again, is the China kind of the balance that is held. And the ASEAN nations, particularly, having a diplomatic, rather than, let's go to war and all of that. But do you think that a very quick comment, the South China Sea issue, 4 or 5 years ago is very much top of the agenda, it's gone down a bit. Why do you think that's gone down a bit? And is it because China has also appreciated the voices from Southeast Asia? After that, I'll open the floor to questions. A very quick response.
In fact, the way China handles Southeast Asia dispute is a good example of what we call friend or potential friend. From Chinese point of view, at this particular moment, the Philippines is a troublemaker for China. They already, memorandum of understanding between two sides. Yet this current regime is not abiding by this kind of understanding, try to provoke troubles with support of the United States. Yet China has exercised a maximum constraint. China so far has only used water cannons, not firing a single bullet. Compared with the United States, when the United States became the largest economy in 1890s, it launched war against Spain, occupied the Philippines, killed, I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands, if not more, and occupied Cuba. But China so far only used water cannons. Although I know even we send one Chinese destroyer, we can literally destroy Filipino Navy, but we don't do that. And because we know Filipino politics goes ups and downs. One government pro-China, one government against China. So things will change. We have a long-term view. You have this kind of self-restraint. It also works well with other ASEAN members. They appreciate that because Filipino behavior is not appreciated by most members of ASEAN. It's a violation of the ASEAN principle on South China Sea. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, let's open the floor. Is there microphones? Paul first. Paul. Please introduce yourself, and if you could keep the comment or the question short. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chandran, and thank you.
Is your mic on? Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you, Chandran. Thank you, Professor Wong, and the panelists for a very enlightening conversation over here. This is very comprehensive. You have very eloquently described the civilizational model of China. I am so impressed. I came here looking for a reason to believe, and I'm a believer. But I'm also the co-president of the Club of Rome, and the Club of Rome has historically been known to be skeptical. 70 years ago, we started with a very skeptical question about economic growth, that there were limits that were not being recognized, and when you grow economically, you pay a price, and you can hide the costs, you can do all kinds of tricks, but ultimately there are costs and sacrifices. So let me ask you to reflect upon what are the sacrifices and what have been the costs of the Chinese miracle and who is bearing them? Thank you.
You know, in fact, China has been able to achieve peaceful rise with such a scale and such a large population. If you compare China rise with the rise of European states, UK, or Britain, at that time they were the population of 10 million something, 20 million maximum. And the rise of the United States and Japan is 100 million. In the case of China, 1.4 billion. Yeah. Yet, China's rise has been peaceful, which means a lot of sacrifices are borne by Chinese within China. I gave this example of comparing with the UK. They could have slave trade. They could export criminals to Australia. Yeah, they could do many bad things. But China has to digest all the problems within China. It's by no means easy. For instance, Apple had companies in China for so many decades. Microsoft as well. Chinese workers only earn maybe 5% of the total profits. 95% go to American companies, go to intermediaries. But Chinese still feel reasonably pleased with 5%. But even with that, at that time, it's considered as we can improve our living standards, we can get a better salary, etc. So it's in relative terms. Yet what's good is we have a long-term vision. And this is only something that the Chinese civilization may allow this to happen. For instance, when we started reform and opening up, Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping said, let's start with coastal areas. So they began take off way ahead of the interior parts of China. But by the time of Jiang Zemin, 25 years ago, we began to emphasize the interior part of China. So this kind of gap you can see. When coastal has become more prosperous, interior part of China is still bearing the cost in many ways. But the overall objective is, long-term objectives, is by the year 2020, which means 5 years ago, all poverty eliminated. Yeah. And by the year 2025, well-off living standards for all population, same minimum standards. So in China, there are no extreme poverty because this condition for meeting is not low. It's called the 两不愁三保障, 2, no worries, 3, guarantee. No worry about food, no worry about clothing, guarantee for compulsory education, guarantee for medical insurance, guarantee for housing. It's done across China. If you go to Tibet or Xinjiang, 45 square meters per person in the housing space. And free medical checkup every year for Tibet. I was there last week. So with this kind of level, it has a lot of trust in the government, in the central government. It's also part of Chinese civilization because it's a kind of mutual engagement. The state has people trust. It has to be responsible for so many things. In the United States, you don't need to care. I'll give you an example of Tibet. On the same day, there was an earthquake in Tibet, 4,000 above sea level. Yet Chinese military reached the spot within 5-6 hours and began to rescue. Within 24 hours, food, electricity, everything restored. On the same day, the big fire, forest fire in Los Angeles, over 10,000 houses burned, as if nothing has happened. And it's just everything is unavoidable. For Chinese philosophy, Chinese government, Chinese state, and Chinese civilization, this is really cannot be accepted. This is bad governance to the extreme. It's an evil system. You have to destroy that kind of system. Really, I don't want to offend the Americans from a Chinese point of view. Bias Chinese, we have much higher standard governance, and quality of governance, and competence of governance. Otherwise, I'll tell you an example. In Tibet, when this earthquake occurred, within 1 hour, the drone automatically goes there to take pictures of the earthquake. And then the Chinese military began to operate within 2 hours. So this is kind of what we call good governance. It's in each and every details. So in long term, as China's long civilization, it gone through many ups and downs, and so we accumulated experience, positive and negative. In the end, people appreciate, really. We are humble people, we appreciate whatever. In the end result is good. So we all have suffered a bit here and there, but for the whole nation, for the whole civilization, this Chinese Communist Party and the central government on the whole has performed really to the best of its ability. It's widely appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, put your hands up, and we'll get a mic to you. My God, no questions? Oh, yes, please.
Hi, my name is David Champy. I'm with the USA chapter of the Club of Rome, and I have a question that I just wrote out. Interstate rivalry to dominate superiority over nation states in various fields can only lead to conflict by creating winners and losers. Is it possible that a pathway forward would be to create global zones of cooperation in terms of economics, social, and military spheres?
Professor Zhang, before you reply that, and so that you can get a rest, maybe the panel members could also respond to this pathways for global cooperation, etc. Mapela, would you like to give your perspective on that, please?
I believe it's possible to have global cooperation, but we've got to start with understanding what it means to be human. Because racism and a sense of superiority has become, or has been, the barrier. And I agree with Professor about Europe really has to look into itself. You cannot build a civilization on the basis of genocide, slavery, and exploitation, and believe that you can just stand up the following day and walk forward as if nothing has happened. And I believe that Europe owes it to itself. No one is saying, therefore, spend your life pleading guilty, but just acknowledge the pain and suffering. And there will be forgiveness. I come from a country where we were treated as non-people. But the important thing is not the verbal, it's not the saying, it's the doing. How are we going to move forward as a global family, as a human family that respects, in a very fundamental way, the value of each and every person, the value of every living element, because we are within a web of life. And with that kind of approach, that living systems values approach, it becomes easier for us to collaborate across boundaries. And I have watched some of the ASEAN and conversations that were there. It is possible when you treat other people as your fellow human beings to find ways of collaborating, because we all bring different things to the table. And so I really believe it is possible, but we've got to all work hard to acknowledge that where we are is not where we want to be, and then talk together about how we plan a different future. And that is possible.
Thank you, Mapela. Anybody else got a question, please? Yes, please.
Yes, hello. My name is Louis Klein. I'm the Secretary General of the International Federation for Systems Research. As probably everybody in the room, we're amazed of the progress of China. And we see that 5-year plan after 5-year plan, we're advancing even further. Question will not be what's the limit, but what happens if you outgrow in prosperity all the others? What happens if China is the number one in terms of prosperity? Is China prepared at that moment to step in, open its gates and say, the poor of the world, come in, migrate to China. We are willing to share our wealth. And what, closing with a famous quote on that one, and what's love got to do with it?
Okay, Professor, would you like to quickly respond? I noted Yogan nodding his head in a, I don't know if it's an Indian yes or a European no, but we'll find out. So.
Well, I will first come to that question briefly. You know, as Madam just mentioned, this issue of racism and sense of superiority, etc. And Chinese culture is, in a way, very respectful on the whole of other cultures. For instance, if you compare the China-ASEAN, when China-ASEAN signed the treaty on free trade, and Chinese Prime Minister said, it's about 20 years ago, he said, if our ASEAN friends feel 10 years from now, somehow this treaty is only in China's favor, not in ASEAN's favor, we can renegotiate the treaty, we can revise the treaty. So this kind of magnitude of mind, I call it, is like a big power. Totally different Donald Trump. I was in South Africa. They told me when last year or the year before in Washington, they have this African-US summit. They provide bus loads, for African leaders. The same bus, school bus. The Africans deeply offended. But when China-African summit was held in Beijing, Xi Jinping meet each and every African leader one-on-one. Always saying if it's an official visit, official ceremony, like US President. So this is very important. Now, concerning this free immigration, let's all be very cautious about that. And, Chandri mentioned I'm quite good at make strategic predictions. I'm the first intellectual or whatever scholars who predicted in 2010, 2011, when Arab Spring occurred, I said it will become Arab winter very soon. I told my European friends at that time, because Europeans supported enthusiastically Arab Spring, I said, you will suffer from that. In the end, when this Middle East African country somehow broken by this so-called democracy, enthusiasm, whatever, and became war zones, refugees occurred. So we must be very cautious concerning this issue of migration, immigration, not just treat it as a simple issue. It's very complicated. We must be have a kind of cultural conscious. You just look at the problems now within Europe and within European countries. Because I mentioned this idea of civilizational state. Some Europeans also say we should also have EU as a civilizational state. Then people began to question, can we have a civilized state? It's impossible. Because now, how can we see European civilization based on Christianity? No, that'll be very controversial. They'll not accept it. So it's, no, cultural thing is very complicated. We must treat it as it is and study these issues when they arrive. Thank you.
Okay, we got 5 minutes to wrap things up. This gentleman, quick question, second question, and then I'll go around the panel for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Haifeng Huang from Peking University. I'm also associate member of the Club of Rome. I also admire your speech because in my class, I conduct China studies. There are so many students from the whole world. They come from the different region and the cultures, different background. But there is one big issue for my class. There are so many misunderstandings about China's development. I want to ask you, dear Professor Zhang, do you think the Chinese model or Chinese development will become the good example for developing country or not? Why there are so many misunderstandings from the Western media about China? Thank you.
The next question, the next question, and then Professor, if you can respond, and then both panel members, Peter and Mampela, closing remarks. Thank you.
I'm Yoshi Hayashi from Japanese Association. Just one maybe different comment. Nowadays, the so-called developed countries have become facing aging. And that has raised various problems. But the problem for developed countries are not only physical raising, but laziness to learn from the others. One of the good examples is, in my knowledge, China. The government started government scholarship giving to students to send to foreign countries. In my understanding, 1984, when the government did not have money, very low income days, GDP days, started the first year, more than 800 students were sent. So started to learn the other cultures or knowledge. Nowadays, over 50 students are going out from China, in my knowledge. But Europe, America, and including Japan, have become more aged, not only aged, but they started not to learn from the others. So today's problem all over the world is not to share the individual variable values existing in other countries, in other places. That's the biggest problem. So I have conducted four symposia these 2 weeks, including sharing art, started from Japan. Sylvia talked about art, Asian art, Japanese art, and judo. So they are maybe little, but very valuable to be shared. Now is a day to start sharing values, the others. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoshi-san. Would you like to comment? Then I'll ask the...
Okay, my brief comment. Because the first question raised by Professor Huang, I think the problem is for many in the West, especially the deep state, they are very fearful of possible alternatives to Western model, the political, economic, social. Because once you have an alternative, then which means their model may not be that attractive. The Chinese are very open-minded. this model could be work for you, that model could be work for us, that model could be work for another country. So very open. We never impose our model on others. We said we have certain experience to share with you. If you like, you can appreciate, you can learn. If you don't like, we don't care. Yeah, much more open-minded. So it had to do with, because many deep states believe that there cannot be a China model, cannot be Chinese alternative for other countries, so this is evil, so this kind of smearing campaign always goes on. Behind this is a kind of fear. But as soon as many people who come to China see for themselves, you have your own model, which is by far successful. Yeah. So that's my point. Now, concerning our Japanese friend, I think, fortunately, Chinese have a culture beginning from Confucius. Confucius famously said, when you are with another two individuals or three individuals, two of them can be your teacher. It's always, when we're together, four of us, three of them can be my teacher. So this philosophy goes back thousands of years. As a result, we are a culture of learning. Whatever good, in whatever country, whatever system, we try to find it for China or for Chinese people. So I hope other countries could also borrow a bit of this kind of culture. Thank you.
Well, I really have enjoyed being on this panel with you, Professor, and my friend. But my takeaway is we need to seriously interrogate the language we use. That we as members of the Club of Rome continue to talk about developed and developing, I think is a problem. And it goes back to my initial conversation. We need to fundamentally transform education, learning, and our approaches to it. Because all of that reflects the archaic industrial revolution thinking. We need to break with that, and this is what has made China successful, and find our way, which is deeply embedded in the culture, the traditions, not just because they are your tradition, but you've got to choose of those traditions what would be working. The last point I want to make is, I think all of us need to take away from this conversation the hard work that has gone into China being this big super, as you call it, the supers. They didn't come because they talked about it. They came because they worked at it. And I have to say, on the first day of our conference, when we were still in Shanghai, we nearly fell over on the floor because the Chinese guys and ladies kept going and we were out of breath. So we have to learn the trick about hard work. Thank you.
Yeah, the interesting reflection I have that I really appreciate that you have developed a model what is so anchored in your history, in your context. And strange enough, it doesn't make me think we should copy that model for Europe. I exactly think we should go that way as well and take some of the issues Mampella have said, well, there is a history of slavery and colonialism. It's still in the people who have to deal with that. At the same time, I'm probably more positive than about what is happening in Europe than just saying, well, Europe doesn't work hard enough. They only talk. A lot of things are happening, but it is a different culture. And it is a culture of where also there are also many philosophers. You mentioned one, Spinoza. What is interesting, there are many more. Erasmus is very interesting in the context. And that what they teach us is maybe more starting too much with reflection and then action. But I think only action and then reflection is maybe also not for the Europeans the way. It's a good mixture. And if we start to respect that other parts of the world do it in another way and can learn from that, then I really do find these new areas of cooperation, both culturally, economically, Also economically and also culturally. Thank you. But thank you a lot for giving the insights. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It leads me to just thank Professor Mampela and Peter for contributing in a very meaningful way, and I hope we all got to understand a bit more about China. Paul, your question, I think the sacrifices, the little I know, were immense. And I think China went through the stages of saying we have to develop, we'll make sacrifices, there'll be trade-offs. And if I'm right, this is the point at which now it's essentially cleaning up some of the trade-offs. We haven't talked enough about what next for China in terms of challenges, but I hope over dinner and lunch over the next few days you can talk to Professor, because it's not all a bed of roses. There's a lot of challenges ahead. And the Chinese, I think, understand it better than most of us who might be seduced by all the nice things that we've seen, but there are lots of challenges ahead. So thank you everyone for coming. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you, Professor Mampela and Peter. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think they will take a picture of you, don't know, as panelists. Just a minute. Thank you so much. Don't worry, I won't be long. Is it just to thank our panelists and to say that now we move almost immediately, I would say at 6 o'clock we have the gala dinner in the second floor of this same building, where we will have the occasion to continue the conversations. I'm sure that this session has been